take it ahead. You can take it from here.
All right, well, I can't take it from here because guess what, guys? Time for another episode of the OPP podcast.
Yeah.
Today, we got the crew. We got Kane, Abood, and Amir, and we have our guest today, Sal. Now, Sal, you live in Hebron in Kiryat Arba, right?
Yeah, I lived in Hebron for about a year, and I've been a resident of Kiryat Arba for about 4.
And you were also saying before we started, we were chatting a little bit. You are a blogger, and you sent us an article that you had in the Times of Israel, right?
Correct.
Your article, yeah. Now, it's a bit unusual so far that a guest has sent us something that they wanted to talk about, but I mean, it's something you've done yourself, so it's all good. It's about Ariel Gold having a debate with Malcolm Fleischer.
Correct.
Yeah, and you're saying like you have some issues with the stuff Ariel Gold says. And I mean, to be fair, Ariel Gold is, how do I put it nicely? A bit of a dumbass. Even by my lefty standards, she's a bit out there. Yeah.
So tell us what your opinion on this is, Salomon.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, I personally don't have any problems with people having their own opinions if they're left-wing, right-wing, center-left, center-right. You know, obviously I'm a right-wing person, but I come from the liberal classic theory of believing that everyone has the right to their own opinion. And, you know, growing up in the U.S. and living with a constitution there, everyone has the right to free speech. You know, however, if you're going to debate someone, you should have facts involved, and you shouldn't, you know, say stuff that will ruin your credentials. And I feel that once you start saying stuff that's like completely ridiculous, then you start losing your credentials to like speak at all. So then you become from, you know, like it could be like, you know, Norman Finkelstein or Noam Chomsky that I totally disagree, but you know, at least he's an intellectual and he's incredibly brilliant and has things to say, and you could disagree with what he says, but he's not going to say something that's like outlandish. Ariel Gold, as soon as she starts saying stuff that's just blatantly not true, as much as she may believe what she's doing is like, you know, her God-given right to help people on the other side of the world, once you start saying these lies, it's just not going to get anywhere, and someone like myself will debunk them very quickly.
Yeah, because I mean, it's very important for a conflict that is as polarizing as ours for people to just get the facts right. Because I mean, like the second, like people start bringing up anything that kind of just even involves Jews, you start to get conspiracy theories. You start to get like old school anti-Semitism brought up, and people just start making stuff out of the air that they think about Jews or by extension Israelis, and they just start bringing it up. And I've noticed there's a point in here where it's just like basic facts that Ariel Gold got wrong, such as...
Talk about that. What exactly was your issue with it? What were the...
Yeah, that was what I'm about to ask.
So, I mean, at first she obviously got incredibly wrong where her opponent was from. Her opponent does not live in Kiryat Arba, or Hebron. She lives in Efrat, which is a community, you know, 25 minutes north of here.
Mm-hmm.
So that's obviously something that Malka should have corrected, but obviously she didn't know who her opponent was or where she was from, so she definitely got that wrong. But I mean, that's like the least of it. You know, Ariel Gold mentioned that after 1994, the Ibrahimi Mosque, as she says, was converted into a synagogue as kind of a reward for settlers.
The Ibrahimi Mosque, where is that exactly?
It's Merat Machpelah, Cave of the Patriarchs.
Okay, so they call it the Ibrahimi Mosque. Okay.
And how inaccurate is that?
So that's incredibly inaccurate, because first of all, it was a Jewish king that built the sanctuary over 2,000 years ago.
Yeah, it's a really old.
You know, Jews prayed there for like 2,000 years until the Muslim conquest came, and when Muslims come to an area, they normally tend to, take over any kind of worship, whether it's a church or synagogue, they turn it into a mosque. If you look at, for example, in Turkey, the big palace of the Sophia Palace used to be, the Byzantine Empire used to be a big church. Now it's the Sophia Mosque and the Blue Mosque, which were at once churches. So that's what Islam does.
You're actually right. We have a church on the top of Mount Gerizim here, and on top of it, just 650 years ago, there's a mosque that was built on top of the church. That's somewhat true.
Yeah. So that's really what happened. Ariel Gold says that it was an ancient Muslim site, which is also like incredibly silly, because obviously until the 1198, when Salah ad-Din came and conquered Jerusalem and conquered all Israel, they kicked the Jews out and forbid them from praying inside the cave of the patriarchs, and they weren't allowed on the seventh step. And which is something that Ariel Gold totally left out. Even like the most anti-Israel person knows this part of history, or if they do and they don't want to give legitimacy to Jews, so they'll refuse to talk about it. So they'll just ignore that part of history. But what Ariel Gold basically said was, in 1994, Jews were not allowed to go in there until 1994, Baruch Goldstein massacre. The army gave them permission to go back, which is not true. I have a book here. It's called My Hebron. I recommend anybody that wants to know a lot about the history. It's written by Professor Ben-Zion Tavger. He was a physicist who was living in the Soviet Union. He was fighting to get to Israel, and eventually when he came here, he went to live in Kiryat Arba, and he speaks about his time as a activist for the Marat Machpelah, and he writes during his time, this is back in the 70s, and from the 67 onward, they were interchanging time. So like Jews were allowed to pray in the mosque for a certain amount of time, then the Muslims would come in with their time of prayers, and there was always like an interchange of switching back and forth. So the fact that Jews didn't pray in there before is not true. Look at history. You can, My Hebron by Ben-Zion Tavger goes over it. Interesting book. So, and
is she
also
saying that out of ignorance, or?
Huh?
Is she saying that out of ignorance, or just trying to prove a point, or?
It's probably out of ignorance, because my guess is she's probably only been to Hebron like 2 or 3 times. She had the tour of the incredible leftist tour where they come up and they tell tourists, this is where my brother was murdered here by settler yesterday. Here is where, and I actually, when I was living in Hebron,
is the accent necessary though?
Well, I'm trying to. It's fine if it offends someone and it's the whole Me Too movement, then I'll stop. But in any case, look, like when I was a student in Shavei Hebron, and there was a time where I needed to start working because I was just like losing money, and I was like negative 3,000 shekels in the bank. So I had to get a job, and the job I got was being a security guard for tours, and I had this old M1 rifle that I'd walk around with. And as I'm walking around, I heard this one tour guide who points to me, and he says, this man, he raids our home every night. Oh. And there are all these people from like Europe are looking at me with disgust, like, how dare you? And I'm just thinking to myself, like, one, I'm no longer an active soldier. I can't just like, if I try to walk to the Arab side of Hebron, I'll be arrested by the border police immediately. And also, I have a really old rifle from like World War II, which is not even used by either the security forces in Kiryat Arba or by the soldiers at all. So like, that's just ridiculous. But again, this is the kind of like narrative that they say because they get good money from saying about how terrible they are and how terrible we are and how good they are and how oppressed they are. And they also charge like $200 or $150 per tour. Mm-hmm. So that's what I probably think happened is Ariel Gold probably already incredibly leftist in her mind anyways, because before she was involved with Israel, she was involved with Called Pink and was against the Iraq War. So she was already leftist to begin with. She just goes on this tour, and then all her liberal biases are just reaffirmed.
Mm-hmm. I see. I see. Now, I want to ask you, Sal. You know, you kind of said that these guys are profiting off doing leftist tours over there, and people like Ariel, obviously she's profiting from her 2 cents in the conflict, if you like. I think it's kind of all beside the point. Like, she has to be corrected. I think you're 100% right. You know, if she said something that's incorrect about Hebron and about prayers, it should be corrected and rectified. But I think that we really need to start looking at people like yourself who live in Kiryat Arba, who have lived in Hebron, who understand the area of the West Bank. What can we do proactively together as Israelis, as Palestinian, and on the Palestinian side as well? What can we do to not even bring peace about? Let's not even rush there, but just to even build a conversation, build a dialogue between the two communities.
Get an actual foundation.
Yeah, because to me that seems key. Like, I served in Hebron, you know, and I've been there a few times. I was there recently, a few months ago. So I kind of know a little bit more than Ariel Gold, with all due respect, you know, as to what's going on over there. And it seems to me like Hebron is the joker in the rough, because it has so much potential to be one of the biggest tourist cities in Israel, Palestine, one of the most busiest, bustling markets. You know, if they opened up back there, you know, where the Casbah is, and if the Shuk opened up over there again. And I think there's so much potential for cohesion, actually, over there. Same goes for up in Nablus, but I think they're two different, you know, things. You know, they're two different kettle of fish over there. But from your perspective, what do you think people need to do, or what can be done to address the disconnect that we have between the two communities?
So I think one thing is there should be joint tours of people going to Hebron with both an Arab that lives there and a Jew that lives there, and actually talk about what it's really like living there. And it's not this like war zone that people think, even though that did exist back during the Second Intifada and the First Intifada, where, you know, the army had machine guns on top of roofs and they were firing into the area and then they'd fire back. I mean, it's like long been past that. Like, you walk through Hebron, it's like an incredibly quiet place. Nothing really goes on, except when you have the exception of rowdy people that come for a Shabbat, and then you get the kind of photos and videos like you saw, I think a few months ago. No, sorry, it was like 2-3 years ago. There was like an Ethiopian soldier that was like trying to help an Arab get away from an angry mob of people. So the media took a photo of that, like, see evil West Bank Hebron settlers trying to, you know, kill a Palestinian, and the soldier is like, you know, trying to hand over the Palestinian as a sacrificial lamb to, like, you know, kill him, and like use, obviously didn't say that extreme, but, you know, that's pretty much what the media said. What actually happened was there's a group of, you know, people that are coming back to religion. This one of these Breslov rabbis goes to prisons and tries to bring people. There's like a bunch of criminals like hanging out, like doing drugs, and the border police couldn't do anything about it because they were told to like back off. Like, these are people that they're trying to rehabilitate, and, you know, they caused havoc, you know, for the whole time. Like, they tried to go into the Chabad house, and, you know, they annoyed the Chabad rabbi because like he's trying to sleep, and they're like bothering them. You know, they're taunting these kids because they're Arabs. And obviously, look, it's not the best situation, but it's like people from out of town that normally cause problems. So back to your question, what they should do is obviously have a tour with like two people that have no political agenda, and they're just trying to show people what life is really like, and just show both sides. Like, most property that Jews live on in Hebron was Jewish property before 1948. Like, it literally goes back 500 years when the Jews from Spain came back to Israel and started to reestablish a community there. I mean, before that, it was a Karaite community. And when the Karaites died out, Sephardi Jews came and they reestablished a community there. And that should definitely be talked about. But then you should also talk about as well all the refugees that left in 48 that they came to live in Hebron. Because what people don't really understand is that most of the property that was Jewish property before 48 was in Judea, Samaria, and Jerusalem, and most property that belonged to Arab Palestinians were on the coast. So that's something that people need to understand, and also like understand the implications if in the future, you know, there would be some sort of right of return for people to go back. The same situation that happens to Arabs in East Jerusalem will happen to Jews that live around Yaffo and Akko and Haifa.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. The theme of misconceptions and the way that people view the whole situation here seems to be playing a role here. So I wanted to ask you about another perhaps misconception. Do you actually feel afraid or anxious when you see Palestinians around you? Do you feel like you're going to get hurt?
No, not really. I just see them as any other people just walking by.
Have you ever been in any Palestinian territory, East Village, or by any chance?
When I was in the army, I was in Tukarim, Jenin, Ramallah. I was involved in the 2014 operation in Jenin, which was like the biggest one, where all of Kfir just like jumped in. It was the guy who was in charge of the Jenin theater. But other than that, like in my whole military service, I've never had to like physically hurt somebody. I've never had to, you know, physically, you know, hurt anybody. But obviously there's also the level of, you know, operation, you know, professionalism you have to maintain. And once like you realize the guy's not a threat and the guy's, you know, totally fine, talking from a soldier perspective, then you can, you know, kind of break down. Like when I was in Jenin and I used to man the checkpoint, that would go from, if anyone knows the area of Jenin, there's Yabid, there's Mevo Dotan, there's Hermesh, and then there's the entrance to Jenin. So our mission was to stop Jews from going into Jenin. That was like main reason why we were there. And we also needed to show a presence to Palestinians that, you know, we're like checking people out. So it was Ramadan. And, you know, one thing that I always think is that, you know, I have to show the human side, because I'm not just representing, you know, Jews in Israel. I'm also representing myself as a human being. And it's very important to maintain your sanity as a human being. So it was Ramadan. So I'd come up to a car and I say, "Andak khubz Arabi? Andak dajaj?"
You have bread, you have chicken.
I'd ask them, like, "Do you have chicken? Do you have pita?" And they'd be like, "Ah." You know, like they say, "Ah," like, "Yes." So I say, "Ramadan Kareem ya Amsu." Yeah. So I would tell them, like, you know, happy Ramadan, you know, continue, you guys could go on. So it's always that kind of thing. When I was in Hebron, obviously most interactions that I've had with Arabs have been the tours of people just coming in trying to ask you questions, and then they kind of like you know, try to like paint you as a racist to the tourists that are coming by. And one of the biggest questions I get is, do you think you're better because you're Jewish than all these Arabs? Do you know they're human? And by that point I'm like, yeah,
it's such a leading question.
As the Merchant of Venice said, like, do I not bleed and die if I tickle, do not laugh? So that's kind of like what comes to mind.
The Merchant of Venice is probably not a very good example.
No, but it's like the fact that everyone's flesh and blood, and like, you know, we're all human at the end of the day. Like, there's nothing in my religion that says that I have to like hate someone because they're not me. Like, that's nonsense.
Yeah,
definitely.
But that's always the one thing that they always try to ask you, or they always try to ask you about ethnic cleansing. Like, how is it to be part of genocide?
How is it to be part of genocide? Well, I mean, their population's growing, so.
That's true. The population is growing. And how do you respond to people that accuse you of being part of a genocide?
So it depends who I'm talking to. I mean, sometimes you're dealing with people that are just so into their world that you can't really change it. So sometimes I'll just walk away, like, well, that's really dumb. Or sometimes if I realize that they generally believe that and they're like good people, then I'll have a conversation. Like, okay, like, I'll ask them, why do you think I'm genociding people? Like, you know, when I was in the army, like, I've almost never had to shoot my rifle, and I was a combat soldier and I was a heavy machine gunner, never had to like kill anyone. Like, do you know that, you know, the fact of genocide is actually putting people into camps and and stopping their education, culture, completely destroying them. And they all still speak Arabic. They're still walking around. There's still a growing population. They're still around. Like there's no like governmental program to like put people in camps and like burn them alive in ovens. It's just not happening.
Yeah.
That's
Of
right.
course. I mean, like,
I think, yeah, sorry, Jared. I think that's fairly obvious to people that are looking at it from a fair point of view. Most people understand this. I think one of the biggest issues when we look at the conflict that's dragged on now for 100 years is that kind of the Palestinians have been left, to kind of fend for themselves, and in that way, they've turned out a lot more worse for wear. You know what I mean? Split between the PA and Hamas, and split between. Whereas Israel has managed to, gain territory in the '67 war and flourish, if you like. And I think part of the solution needs to be some kind of solution to the crisis. Now, me being someone who lives in Kiryat Arba, obviously over there in the West Bank, I wanted to really get your opinion on a war.
yeah, well, his signal
You
decided
see,
it was going to
what
die.
would you see?
Amir, you
as-
got cut
as
off,
a-
my friend.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
your
just- I
signal
was-
died.
Oh, sorry. Am I back there now?
Yeah, you're back now.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Sal, so when it comes to a solution to the conflict, what kind of format do you see as being best to start with, Are we talking one state, two state, federation, no state? Where's the kind of base?
And
for
what
you,
about like
to
settlements
start
also?
talking?
Because Palestinians also see settlements as an obstacle for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think the first thing is that we have to recognize that there's literally 3 states right now,
Yeah.
in a sense,
Yeah.
okay? So you have Gaza as literally like a state by itself.
Yeah.
Israel has no intention of going back in, having to deal with that. That's why we spent millions of dollars on Iron Dome to knock stuff in the air and just leave us alone. So Gaza's already a state by itself. Now when you look at the Palestinian Authority, Sulta, you're looking at a situation where they have a semi-autonomous government where, they have certain ministries and they collect taxes, and this is what we thought they wanted back in 1994, 1993, signing of the Oslo Accords. What's gone on is that the PA government wasn't exactly what we thought it would turn out to be. So, I mean, again, just to get to your question real quick to answer you, is that I think that Israel should just annex the West Bank and, give Israeli sovereignty. People that want to be, which, by the way, I think maybe a third probably wouldn't want to be citizens of Israel. I think a third would be. And I think a third would be kind of agnostic to the situation of whether to become a citizen or not. But if we annex the West Bank, it won't hurt us because it will have 66% majority Jewish still. If we were to annex Gaza, that would be like a terrible idea because then we'd like lose a Jewish majority. So I wouldn't be for that. But I definitely...
No, go ahead, Sal, sorry.
But I definitely think that, it's within our capacity to, one, annex the West Bank, obviously give people residency with the ability to get citizenship if they want, because I don't believe in enforcing citizenship on anybody. And I think we should get rid of the Palestinian Authority. That's a corrupt government who hasn't cooperated with us like they should have since the early to late 90s.
It's funny, my barber just told me that like 2 days ago. He told me we have a corrupt government and a corrupt, about the PA. So
I mean, there's corruption in every government. Like there's corruption in Israel, there's corruption in the U.S. Every single capitalistic society has corruption. Those are one of the flaws of democracy. But the fact is that how much you get corruption under control.
Right.
Like Israel has arrested, prime ministers, and they've been able to deal with people that are corrupt. like Ari Deri that like embezzled money from the Knesset and then used it for his stuff. Like he went to prison, and you have, you know,
Yeah, but he
police.
also came back into the same exact ministerial position he got arrested for embezzling from.
Well, there's an idea that once you get out of jail, you're reformed. But if you don't reform, then you go back in.
Yeah, I suppose, but still, the onus is on us because he's been accused of embezzling again. So I feel like
He's been accused of embezzling again, and if it's true, he'll go back to prison. Like there's literally a whole government agency in the police called Lahava, and they literally like go after people viciously because they're looking to build a career for themselves. So the prosecutors, it's like I don't like to use crude language, but I think this warrants it. Like they really come when they feel that they're going to like nail someone big.
Yeah.
And that's something that obviously the PA, it's like it's non-existent.
Yeah. I mean, like you ask any everyday Palestinian like what they think of the PA, the first word out of anyone's mouth is going to be, "Oh, it's corrupt to the core."
Well, it's not everyone. I mean, they do have supporters. Like
they do have loyal
I
ones
work
to
with Arabs every day, and I when I used to work in Efrat in Khalkhul, I used to meet a lot of people that would tell me with pride that they voted for the PA, for Fatah in the municipal election in Khalkhul. So they do have supporters. I mean, if you look at the last election in 2006, Fatah got 54 seats in parliament. So they do have supporters. It's not like everybody.
I'm not saying they don't have supporters. I'm just saying that like even the people who do support them can tell that like the government over there is fucked, in no unsure words.
It's not quite Gaza though.
Oh yeah, well I mean Gaza, we've already said Gaza is another thing all on its own. Like there's no way Gaza.
I don't know that though. I was watching some sort of debate. It was a radio show, LBC. Someone called in, and they had no idea what they were talking about. No, it was Majid Nawaz, who's a former extremist who, you know him?
I know.
He reformed, he was telling someone that they clearly don't know what they're talking about, but they were accusing Israel of genocide and of what we're doing to Palestine. And when asked what is Palestine, they couldn't define it. They didn't know that Gaza and the West Bank were separate things, and they had no idea what they were talking about. So
well, I guess it's
important to put that out there, basically, that as many times as possible, so people understand and hear it.
Yeah. I think, Kane, it's a good thing we did the podcast with Zahir then yesterday to clear up all the kind of falsehoods on Palestine and history and ties to the land, because I think that's one of the most important things in this conflict is just to accept each other's right to live on the land, which I know is tough for each side to hear.
But also just to accept reality, because there's a lot of just falsehoods going around on both sides, left or right.
I mean, I've never denied anyone's right to not live here, obviously, just because they're a different creed. Like they were someone that grew up and lived here and has ties some 200, 500, even 1,000 years. It's not my place to tell anybody what to do. But again, they have to understand that as a Jew and as an Israeli, I have my own needs in terms of security, which is like Ariel Gold, one of the things she said in her article. Well, one of the things she said in the debate was that, the PA doesn't really have real autonomy because Israel goes into their area and arrests you in the middle of the night, which in a sense is true. Like we do that. Like that was a lot of my time in the army was going into Area A and arresting people, which by the Oslo Accords is illegal. And we have to understand why we got to that point. And we got to that point from, you had the first suicide bombing in 1983 at the Mehula Junction, where Ayash, the engineer, blew up his first bus. Then you had the 94 bombing of Bus 5. And then you had, the Sbarro bombing. I mean, there was always but these were big ones. And then you had the Netanya bombing in 2002 where, something like 30 Holocaust survivors and 140 other people were killed in a hotel in Netanya. And normally the Israeli military and the Israeli government, how it works is that if they don't have to take action, they will push it off aside as long as they can, or they'll try to retreat from the area to avoid having more soldiers killed and to avoid, the public getting upset. That's why we withdrew from Lebanon in 2000. That's why we withdrew from Gaza in 2005. So Israel was like on this course to like retreat and to like not have to deal with it if they don't have to. And when it came to, in 2002 with the Netanyahu bombing, after all these suicide bombings, and, the right was getting a lot of power because it was under Ehud Barak at the time was the prime minister, he basically said, like, okay, we're going to have to go in, do a serious military operation, and we're going to have to violate the Oslo Accords for our own security. So we literally went into all these areas again, and we started taking terrorists out. And then the following year, 2002, there was about 40 suicide bombings. 2003, the following year, the number went down to 23 suicide bombings. And as we became more involved in security and we started going in and making more arrests and having more of a presence in Area A, is when the suicide bombings like literally kind of came to a halt up to where we are now. And that's why we go in. So Ariel Gold was saying that we just go in there. She doesn't understand the context of why we go in there. She also didn't understand that, she says other countries, like imagine Mexico, the U.S. going into Mexico to like arrest people, or Russia. The thing is that every single sovereign government in the world, if their national security is deemed a threat, they will cross borders without cooperation of the other country and take care of that problem. You saw that in Russia where, Russian dissidents fled to the UK, and then the Russians with the KGB will use polonium and poison people in the UK.
But Sal, yeah. So I know exactly what you're talking about, and it wasn't just the one case. Yet they've done that a few times, right? Yeah. So the only thing with that, one sec, Joe. I just want to say, yes, these things are happening, right? Yes, these things are happening, but maybe they shouldn't be happening. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? Like maybe if we weren't doing as much raids and as much stuff in Area A, there might not be as much tension with the Palestinians and we could work towards a deal. If Russians weren't whacking ex-spies in the middle of London or Salisbury or wherever it was, maybe there'd be less friction worldwide politically and stress on people. I just think that these acts by governments, right, and all big organizations, which we play a part of, they cause more havoc and damage than they do any good.
Right? they do cause certain problems, but every single country has their own interests. And when it comes, for example, if you see The Last Narc on Amazon, so there's this guy. He was he went after if you know about the Kiki Camarena case.
A lot of people probably don't, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm not.
I mean, a lot of Americans do. I mean, especially since
why don't you quickly explain?
So I'll just do this really quickly, just to.
Yeah.
So Kiki Camarena was an agent killed by the cartel in Mexico in 1985. The U.S. actually arrested Mexican citizens by putting them on private jets, flying to the U.S., throwing them out of the private jet, and then flying back to Mexico, which was like technically illegal, but they were doing this for their own national security. And like Mexico got upset that, hey, like you're literally kidnapping, sovereign Mexican citizens. But at the end of the day, there are these things called, national interest and security, and also trying to protect its own citizens, which is the responsibility of every nation. So like when we went to Argentina and we kidnapped Adolf Eichmann for the murder, obviously the Argentinian government got upset because we violated their sovereignty, but it's part of being a government, and it's part of having responsibility of taking care of your citizens.
Okay, so but this is exactly my point though, Sal, right? So grabbing Eichmann, right? You can say that that's a heroic thing to do. We didn't kill anybody. We didn't do anything. We grabbed a mass murderer and we put him on trial over here in Israel in front of everyone, right? But whacking people with polonium in the middle of London and pretending that there's a difference, right, to doing something ethically,
Well, so there is a difference, but you have to understand that governments operate on a different level of ethics, because what they're thinking about is their national security.
Sure.
You know,
And they
that's why like
get
Edward
informed
Snowden
what's gonna
fled to Russia, and he's not coming back for the foreseeable future, because he'll get arrested and probably like, you know, hung, because he released secrets that, you know, as someone from the U.S. that reads those WikiLeaks, so like, wow, this is some pretty bad stuff. Like, the government probably shouldn't be doing this. But from the point of view of the government, this is like, oh crap, like our pants are down. We got to take care of this guy now before he leaks something else. Like, he's a danger to us. Like, that's the way that governments work. And, you know, with all due respect, like, Israel hasn't really whacked anyone since 2014 inside the territories. And I was there with that whack. But, you know, he put up a fight. He was like firing AK-47s back up because didn't want to go back alive. The most serious things that we've done was obviously the assassination of Ayash, the engineer, of Sheikh Yassin, and this was during the Second Intifada. Like, this was a war. Nowadays, the number of raids have actually gone down, and actually there was a poll taken by the Palestinian Census Institute. Has actually shown that the amount of people that actually believe in violent struggle has also gone down. So I think when it gets to the point where the military is like, okay, we don't got to do raids anymore, and we don't have a threat coming out of the West Bank that's terrorist related, you're going to see them just like, you know, slowly like give up the military control that they have here.
I think
And
it's
I
also
think it is
like fair to say, just at one point, that let's not remove the possibility maybe 30-40% of like the people who did those operations, they might have some personal things going on in their life, and they want to go like and do these things, not in a term of like a nationality thing, maybe, you know what I'm talking about?
Well, there was actually a study when I took a terrorism course back in Yeshiva University. There was a study about why people join terrorist organizations.
Okay.
So everyone always thinks that people join terrorist organizations because they have this ideology that they want to fight for it, which is true. But it's not the majority. They found something in the survey, like 66% of people that join terrorist organizations join because their friend or brother joined.
Okay.
And it's just, and they get like this kind of thing like, oh, you know, I'm going to be the big man, I'm going to have the gun. Like the same reason why I joined the military, right? Or the same reason why like 18-year-olds join the military. Like, yeah, we're going to fight, we're going to kill people, it's going to be like Call of Duty. So it's the same reason why like people that were joining ISIS from in the mid to early 2010s. You know, they weren't thinking like, yeah, I believe in the Islamic State and the Caliphate, and, you know, we're going to make the Ummah strong again and conquer everything and kill the Kafars. Like, that's not really what they were thinking. They were thinking like, oh, like, I'm gonna get laid. I'm going to get, like, sex slaves. I'm going to get a gun. I'm going to get paid. I'm going to have property. I'm totally there. Like, let's do this.
Right,
You know,
and don't forget that you like Palestinians, when they get imprisoned in Israel, I think they get a salary, which is kind of an incentive, you know,
from the PA, right?
From the PA.
They get an incentive from the PA. They get about $4,000 a month if they're still alive, and they're in prison. If they're dead, the family gets significantly less money. But they still get like a stipend, which helps.
That has to stop, you know. That's something that, to me,
we had this
I mean, Israel has
That's
control of the PA, though.
That's what I would call an obstacle to peace, for sure.
Yeah, so
Israel has been trying to pressure the PA to stop for years. The Trump administration was really strong because they just cut funding to the PA because of that, and obviously they also killed a U.S. citizen back in Jaffa, you know, for just being there. So, you know, President Trump did a lot to try to stop them, and the PA doesn't really seem to care. I mean, they just keep funding, like no matter how much. I know a lot of people like to make the claim like, oh, Israel completely controls the PA and the PA has no autonomy and therefore it's an apartheid state. But I mean, I have to incredibly disagree with that, because everything the PA has done has gone against what Israel has wanted. Like, if the PA is a puppet state, then it's not like a literal puppet. It's like Chucky from you know, Child's Play.
I like that. Yeah, that's a good one. Can we add that to the show's official list?
Yeah, because to be fair, if it was the way many would have us believe, or not us because we know, but the rest of the world believe, then it would just be, we would flatten them the minute they did anything.
No, like what we would literally do is literally be controlling puppets like this and be like, okay guys, you're going to push this policy, you're going to stop incitement, you're going to like kill terrorists that commit acts against Jews, you're going to arrest them all the time so we don't have to go in. And that's not what happens. Like they incite terrorism, they name streets after terrorists, they fund incitement, they fund terrorists who are in prison, they fund families who were families of terrorists who died in operations. They refuse to negotiate with us on water, they refuse to negotiate us on electricity, they refuse to negotiate on so many things we had to negotiate with the Oslo Accords. And because of that is why Palestinians have water turned off, why the electricity only comes on and off sometimes. And these are issues that Israel looks at it and like, well, you don't want to deal with us, so we're just gonna let you guys do it, like do whatever you want. It's only when like the PA is like, hey, you guys, you know, we could use this little thing or else like things are gonna explode. So then Israel's like, okay, fine. But besides that, there's been no real cooperation with them for like the last 10 years.
Speaking of cooperation, even selling land, you know, if you sell a land to an Israeli, you're doing it like one of the top felony things that can happen.
That was one
even
of the things I mentioned in my article also with Ariel Gold, because first of all, I didn't know what she was talking about. She said that Israeli settlers violently took over a building, and I wasn't sure she was talking about Beit Hadassah, which was like pre-48, was a Jewish building from the 1800s, or whether she was talking about the new Beit Rachel and Leah, that when the Jews came in after they bought the house 10 years ago, and they had to get so many permissions from the Minister of Defense to even go inside the house. When they came in there last Passover, there was literally like sewage, like, you know, 3 inches up, because like the Arabs that were there knew that they were gonna lose the house because, you know, they were just the tenants and the owner actually sold it. So they literally like broke the sewage pipes and there was just like sewage everywhere. So it wasn't exactly like a violent thing. And the guy that sold that that building to the Jews in Hebron had a visa to go to Germany. And at the end, he decided not to go because he's like, oh, I'm not leaving here. Like, no one can tell me not to leave. And the guy's now facing life in prison now because he, like, sold the building to Jews, which has nothing to...
You get life? You get life?
Yeah, you can get life. Yeah, that's...
Really? So, wait, so Abood, if I bought your house...
If you bought my house, well, my house is like what? It's considered... I think it's considered like it's registered under Palestinian territory.
No, but it's Area C. You live in Kiryat Luza, right?
It's Area A and C, but like we got the land from a Palestinian technically, you know. Here's the thing: so many people, like many Palestinians, even do not want to sell to Samaritans, and the way that the Samaritans like find a way is they might find an Arab that they trust, and they sell it to him, and then.
But you won't get life. They won't get life in prison for selling to you.
But no, definitely no. Yeah.
Right.
Because we have the Palestinian ID also. So.
Because you're not them. Is that it?
Well, now to come to think of it, the ones who live on Mount Gerizim, like me, we have the Palestinian ID also, like with the Israeli ID. But the ones who live in Holon in Israel, they only have the Israeli. So I wonder if that law applies. But
I think it's specifically to Jews.
Okay.
No offense to Abood.
Samaritans are kind of Jewish
as much as Samaritans are like the closest religion to us, and you guys actually still do your sacrifices, which I think is really cool. I'd like to go up and see it someday.
The Passover, yeah. Yeah, come over.
What I understood though is that from what I've read is that Samaritans were actually when Islam came around, they suffered under Islam so much. There was a few families that actually converted to Islam, and those families that converted to Islam were actually protecting the other Samaritans from getting murdered from Muslims because they basically thought they saw them as Jews. Which
there's like different eras, but I think there is the hardest eras. The hardest Muslim era was the Abbasim. If you ever heard about them, the Abbasim. They gave us.
It was after the Mamluks before the Turks.
Yeah, before the Turks.
Man knows his stuff.
Oh, they gave us a lot of hard time.
Yeah.
But there's a famous letter by actually the Prophet Muhammad that states that like there are Samaritans that, that like these people are like friendly and It's a famous actually letter. Also, Omar al-Khattab, if you know him. Oh wait, is it Omar al-Khattab or was it Salah ad-Din? I think it was Salah ad-Din. He was also pretty friendly with the Samaritans actually, and that is because the Samaritans showed them around the mountain. Mount Gerizim was a really tactical place against the Crusades. So,
yeah. Quick question, Aboud. Are Samaritans considered dhimmi? Are Samaritans considered dhimmi?
What is that word?
Dhimmi.
Dhimmi. People of the book.
People of the book. Oh, yeah, definitely. Ahl al-Kitab in Arabic, we say. Well, yeah. And here's the thing. We lived in Nablus for many years, but there were some families that didn't understand who we were, and they were kind of almost, like, how do you say, not offensive in a way, but there are other families who protected us by believing that we are the people of the book, so...
Interesting.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
I wanted to pose like a completely hypothetical question to you, Sal, because we asked this question yesterday to our Palestinian guest. So if somehow a state of Palestine was created and they were going to basically take a lot more land than...
basically all of the West Bank.
Yeah, if they were going to take all of the West Bank, would you be okay to take a Palestinian ID?
No, I would not. I would just hop to the other side. I'd be like, screw you guys, I'm going home.
But you're losing maybe a few things. Really? Think about it. You get a lot of low prices. That's what we're having here as Samaritans. We're
but you also get low salaries too.
It's true, but I also have Israeli ID, so I'm having a high salary.
The thing is, I have no desire. Like my grandparents left Turkey, and you know they have no ill will like towards any Muslims at all, but you know they left Turkey for a pretty good reason, which was probably because it wasn't the best place to be Jewish at a certain point.
Right.
Was it under the Young Turks?
It was after it was during the Young Turks that they left, and it was also because they were very secular. Even Jews couldn't be religious, so you know obviously they left, but. I came to Israel to live in a Jewish state. I didn't come to Israel to live under, to be a minority again. Like I've already had enough time being a minority. And I think if there would be a Palestinian state, and again, I'm not taking this from my own beliefs. I'm just saying from a very practical sense, I would put in al-Fahim, Taibe, and all the other triangle places that are like problems for us. Like, here you go, guys, Kfar Qasim, here you go. Join up, and then we keep like Ariel and kind of like the Lieberman plan.
But I mean, I don't have a problem with that plan though, because those people in al-Fahim and Kfar Qasim, they're Israeli citizens. We can't just like
they don't want to join.
Yeah, they don't want to be Palestinian. They're Israelis, and they have problems with the Israeli state. Doesn't mean we could just pawn off our own people. I mean, what if America just like said, you know what, we're tired of BLM, Mexico, Canada, y'all want some fucking land? I'll trade you Atlanta for Montreal. No, fuck that.
No, but
we're not giving away our people.
Okay.
No, but basically, you know, I'm just saying that because literally, like all these places that I just mentioned are not just problems, but like literally the Shabak is in there all the time. They arrest people all the time. You have people that have actually joined ISIS from al-Fahim, and like then they're like they want to come back. Like it is a problem area. Yeah, and there are people from al-Fahim who want to become part of a Palestinian country.
But wait a minute, Saldo, wait a minute, right? You've got, just because one or two people from al-Fahim went to ISIS, that people from London, Manchester, all over went over.
Well,
ISIS,
I mean, you had two British people that committed a terror attack in 2003 in Mike's place in Tel Aviv.
I know, I'm well aware, and I'm very much against terrorism. It's something that's affected my life. You know, I'm 31 now, and it's affected my life since I was a kid, so I'm well aware. But my question to you would be, you know, you wouldn't live in a Palestinian state. You wouldn't obviously stay in Kiryat Arba, but what would you do if the West Bank was an autonomous zone? Israelis called it Israel and Judea and Samaria. Palestinians called it Palestine. You could live where you live at the moment with an Israeli ID and let's say the governance of the infrastructure and land would be shared between Israelis and Palestinians, would you stay then?
I mean, it would kind of be the same situation it is right now. It wouldn't be really much different.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's pretty much like how it is.
All right. Well, there's something I wanted to bring up to you because you were saying, because I mean, it makes it sound like earlier what you were saying, like some people from al-Faham went to join ISIS. So I mean, like if a single bad person spoils the entire municipality, let me ask about there's the Duma arson attack in the West Bank, killed a Palestinian family by Jewish terrorists.
We don't know
from this town or settlement is bad.
That's something that we don't know 100% like what really happened. It looks like they were Jews that were involved, but that case is like the case is still very iffy because it's still in the court system, and there's a question because the people they arrested were minors and whether they were like force interrogated to give confessions or not. Like that's not. I mean, I'm of the opinion it was probably Jews that did it. Whether it was those actual people that did it or not is a different situation. But well, obviously,
the police is pretty sure that there is at least one Jew who did it who wasn't a minor. He's 21 years old and received a life sentence.
Yeah, so look, like if they did it, they got punished, and that's the end of the story. Obviously there's extremists also on the Jewish side, but the amount of Jews that actually do terrorist attacks compared to the amount of Arabs that do terrorist attacks against Jews it's not like the same thing, because there's literally far more terrorists that are planning to do attacks. Like, I mean, you guys have all done the army, so you guys all like done raids and found weapons and arrested terrorists before they went on to attacks.
It is disproportionate, but like you can't write off the whole group, you know?
No, I'm not writing off. I mean,
extremism is still rising amongst Jews.
I'm not writing off the whole group. I was saying that like jokingly.
Yeah, I get you, Sal. I get you, Sal. But right, one of the things that I think we should look at, especially in our region, you know, we have huge issues. Like you said, al-Fahim, Taibe, you know, these places are part and parcel of Israel. Yet they're very dangerous to go around, especially at night. You know, there's bullets flying, there's Hamulot fighting each other, and there's madness, mayhem. Now, the people that suffer most are people in those communities, you know, the people that are living in Rahat, in Taibe, in Tulkarem, Bakal Galbia, all these places. We as citizens need to hold our police accountable for the situation. We need to hold our government accountable for the situation, and we need to want the situation to change. I've been to, you know, a few different Arab villages and towns, and I've seen them protesting against violence and against what's going on. And it's kind of our responsibility at the end of the day as people who are in charge here to do something about the situation. And I just wanted to hear from your point of view and from where you live, what do you think can be done to de-arm radical populations within Israel, Palestine, within the region, because we know that that's a huge issue.
Well, I'm not in favor of de-arming people because plenty of people have guns in Hebron on the other side, and they don't exactly come and shoot us every day. It's mostly for their protection that they use against other tribes. It's only when they...
Well, but that's exactly my point. They use it against other tribes. If there were less guns in the region, then surely there would be less shooting.
No, because then like they would throw rocks at each other, they would stab each other. It's like you take guns at it. I mean, even without guns, you know, they still kill each other all the time. They always have this like,
but it's going to be a lot less deadly with a knife.
It's going to be less deadly. It's going to be less deadly. Look, Sal, I think you're coming from a little bit of an American perspective here on the gun culture and stuff, you know. And I can tell you from somebody who I also lived in the States, right? I also lived in the UK, and I've lived here for
Alabama,
well, you know. And I just think that the English kind of police mentality and the way they deal with things over there, even the fact that our bobbies aren't even armed, you know, they don't even carry guns, which obviously isn't feasible right now for Israel, right? It's not.
It doesn't work well with the UK either. I mean, the UK has a lot of crime, ever since they banned guns, there's still a lot of gun violence that hasn't stopped.
Not compared, yeah, but not compared to America. So you're talking that like that's crazy. It's obviously there's stabbings and there's bad things happening in the UK.
Look, there's obviously like very different cultures. The U.S. has a way larger population than the UK, but when you're talking about Israel, and you're talking about the way I see, like I try to explain the West Bank and the situation of Arabs to an American, I think it's like the McLeans against the McAllisters in West Virginia. Like West Virginia has clans that live out in the mountains, Appalachia, and they kill each other all the time because of family feuds that happened like 150 years ago. So the issue among Arabs, whether it's within Israel proper or whether it's in the West Bank, is that you have family feuds that have gone on for years. So the only way that it could like literally like repair that is to just like have people forget their clan mentality, just interbreed with each other and you know, become Western, which is not going to happen. Like there's at least within our lifetime, there's always going to be this clan mentality of the Jabris and the Tamimis and the Abusnina. There are always going to be some sort of conflict. And there's always going to be some kind of need for mediation. Like It's
besides
just
that, logistically, it's a problem anyway to get rid of the guns. The area is just so saturated with weaponry, and there's always going to be a way to sneak more weapons in around here.
like
Especially
I
when we
don't
don't have full control over the whole area.
I mean, look, like we don't have they don't have school shootings and massacres in their schools, and they don't normally come up and like try to like shoot Jews every day with guns. Like it's not really an issue.
It's not like the war on drugs, I guess.
For them shooting each other, it's an issue.
Yeah,
but
it is an
But they
issue.
also don't shoot. They also don't shoot each other all the time. I mean, a lot of times they try to go through mediation first, and only when the mediation fails is when they like start shooting. Or, I mean, there was one time I was driving in through Hebron from Kiryat Arba, and there was literally like stones flying from two different buildings. I was like, what in the world is going on here? And there's literally like two different Arab clans throwing stones at each other, because I guess someone like raped someone else's like relative, so they were like, you know, trying to like kill each other with stones. I mean, it's just a conflict between themselves that, you know, the only way to do it is either one, you just get rid of the problem tribes, which you can't do that because there's a 49th Geneva Convention of the UN. You can't forcibly move a population from one land into another, so you can't exactly do that. And also, like, to make people get along that, you know, have feuds that go back centuries, it's also not exactly feasible. I mean, it's just a situation that's going to be, when it comes to us and them, like Jews towards Muslim relations, obviously it's very different.
Right.
I mean, we do have issues in terms of their weddings when they shoot automatic fire, and sometimes it lands on our cars.
Oh yeah, if you want to hear a story, actually, we had high school results. I'm sure you know what happens in high school results.
They shoot off bullets and stuff, and they come
so
back and people die.
Yeah, so there's a Samaritan here in the neighborhood who woke up next morning. His windshield was broken, and he didn't know what the hell is going on. So he checked the camera he had, and apparently just shattered like that. So he got into the car and he found a bullet, literally a bullet. The next day, that's like crazy because anyone could have been there. So I don't think they are aware of how potential danger is.
I mean, it's something people don't really think about of shooting guns off in the air. I mean, you see it in movies, you see it on the news. People don't think about where those damn things are going to land.
Well, the thing is that it goes back to the time where, you know, the Bedouins used to, you know, wave swords around, and eventually, like, you know, turn into shooting guns.
Yeah, but the problem is swords stay in your hand and bullets go up and come down.
Yeah.
Like
Well,
40
the fact is, Israel has no legal sovereignty in terms of legislation or judicial laws and the PA authority. So we can't exactly enforce them to like, you know, not shoot in the air and like give out fines for doing it.
Yeah, and it's not just in the Palestinian areas. Like,
I mean,
in Kuwait, it happens everywhere. You know, all of the Arab world.
Well, I mean, if in obviously, you know, if it happened in Jaffa, the cops would like go out immediately and like arrest people, you know. So, or if it happened in Kfar Qasim, it would be a problem, and the Israeli police would show up and like arrest everyone involved. The UAE actually banned that. So the UAE actually banned people shooting guns in the air. And if you do that there, you're gonna, one, lose your gun license, and two, you'll spend some time in prison.
I like the way they think. I like that.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I read a while ago about a wedding in Kuwait where about 40 people got injured or maybe died or something. It's crazy.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, but you know what, guys? We're coming up on an hour.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to end this up, but before we do, real quick, we're gonna make this about an extra 10 or so minutes longer because I got a question real quick for you, Sal. Just real quick. Because, I mean, we're both Americans. We're both American Jews who moved to this country. This one isn't related to the topic at all. This is just a question between me and you. Do you think the government should do more to entice American Jewry to move to Israel?
So, I think that no matter how much they entice people to come, people won't come because their lives are very comfortable in America. And America is that whole melting pot. Like, you know, unlike France, where if someone is born up in France, like, unless you're like full-blown white French person that, you know, their ancestors were literally like cavemen there, a black French guy will never be fully French. A Jew will never be fully French. A Turk will never be fully French. America's this big melting pot where you could be Muslim and still have an American identity, or still be Jewish and still be an American identity. So the fact is that, you know, a lot of American Jews just wouldn't be enticed for anything. I think the only people that are actually interested in coming are people that actually, you know, are religious, like me, and, you know, believe in coming to Israel, or the people who are, you know, super Haredi in their mentality, and they want to live in a place where they can be among other Haredim, and, you know, be in a proper yeshiva system that's not like America. So I think those are the only people that are going to be making Aliyah for America. People like Ariel Gold. Well, I mean, that's an extreme case, but people who are not religious. Frankly,
I mean, that's me though. I still came over here. That's what my granddad was like, and my granddad still uprooted his whole family from New York and brought them over.
The thing is, you're the exception to the rule.
It's true, but like, do you think we could? Like, 'cause that's what I would do if I was in charge of the Ministry of Aliyah. I would just start trying to entice these secular Reform American Jews to come over.
I mean, the fact is that culturally, most American Jews, and I also wrote a blog about this, are so incredibly different because the Jewish culture in Israel is like incredibly different from the American Jewish culture. You know, like the American Jewish culture is like Larry David, bagels, New York, people screaming out loud and cursing, and you know, Susie coming up and calling them a effing four-eyed F and you fat effer, or, you know, bagels and locks, and being narcissistic and always, like, you know, chronically with allergies and stuff. And then the Israeli
those are stereotypes.
But if you look at, like, I'm one of the only Jewish people in my neighborhood that actually played tackle football. You know, like, most Jewish mothers in America is like, what, are you crazy? Your kid's playing tackle football? You know what? I never let my son do that. But if he wants to, you know, be an executive for the Dolphins, I'll definitely support him.
Yeah, of course.
So,
all right.
in Israel, it's different because obviously there's an army, and, you know, people do the army, and there's a lot more of a masculine kind of Jewish character where it's like you go to the army, you know, you do your time. We're building a country. You know, part of being Jewish is being Israeli, and that's part of our identity. And to the average American Jew, the Jewish identity is just like a very cultural thing, not nationalistic at all. So I think that's also a serious issue that most American Jews...
Saying like the American Jews...
Breaking up, Kane. Say that again.
No, I was going to say, you're saying that American Jews you don't think are like physically or maybe even emotionally robust enough to survive in Israel?
I mean, they could. Like, anybody can do it. It's not like a big deal. I mean, it's not like moving to Ghana or Ethiopia, or you know, or the Congo, where you have to fight malaria and take malaria.
You don't have to be too physical to live in Israel.
But the reality is that they just, if you look at people who are actually ready to make Aliyah, they're anything but American Jews. Like, a lot of South American Jews, especially in Argentina, incredibly Zionistic. They have a Zionistic framework because a lot of people don't know this, but a lot of Zionists came to Argentina in the late 1800s, early 1900s to make a Jewish country in Argentina.
Yeah,
And they had,
that was one of the candidates.
And they had like the Jewish gauchos, they called them, the Jewish cowboys that would like ride up and they do cattle, and obviously like the best meat, kosher meat, comes from Argentina and Uruguay. So they have that kind of basis. You know, my mom grew up in Peru. She grew up in going to Beitar her whole life. Everyone in her school made Aliyah. Like most people have like made Aliyah. Like the Jewish community in South America is literally like dying. When my mom was growing up in Peru, there were 20,000 Jews that lived in Peru. Now I checked the last time, there's like 2,000 or less than 2,000. Wow. And my mom, when she came to visit Israel, and she went to visit one of my rabbis from the yeshiva, we had Shabbat dinner. My mom says, you know, when she went to go visit, the school got smaller and the grave got bigger. The grave site got bigger for Jews.
Oh.
So that's the thing. It's just the culture for Jews to make Aliyah is not there like in other places. Like the French Jews are super Zionistic, and you know they have that Jewish nationality. The British are sort of. I mean, there are British Jews that have that nationalistic and religious identity, but there's also some British Jews that are very much like Americans, in the sense that they're like British first and Jewish second, which goes back to Montefiore and goes back to a lot of the wealthy Jews. If you read there's a book called Balfour. It's about 500 pages. The book basically goes over a lot of these like wealthy Jews, like the Samuels, the Montegos, the Montefiores, the Rothschilds, and they very much felt, and even today, they very much feel that they're part of the British aristocracy. They felt very much British as they were Jewish.
Wow.
Well, I mean, the British are kind of good at doing that in making you feel superior for nothing more than being inbred. But with that, we're one step closer to getting to those British tabloids. But for now, guys, episode over. All right.
Did you forget to mention the Patreon again?
Shit! It's going in the end anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. God. Anyway, that was